Hello and welcome to the Girls Fuel podcast. My name is Haley. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition coach here to help you along your health and fitness journey by providing evidence and experience-based knowledge. And as always, full transparency. Today, Jess and I are going over a topic that has been pretty hot, at least on Instagram, with a lot of you that I've talked to. And today we're going to talk about how you can get rid of your allergy-like symptoms for good. So we're talking seasonal allergies, stuffy nose, sinus congestion, watery eyes, even things like itching and headaches. We're going to talk about how to get rid of that and why that even happens. And the main root cause is going to be an overload of histamines in the body or a histamine intolerance. Now, Jess, I would love for you to dive into what are histamines for us.
Yeah, so like Haley said, I've also noticed how big this has gotten over the years and even how much more prominent it is with my clients, especially obviously now going into winter, seasons changing. A lot of women experience it during their cycles. So it's really interesting the role that histamines are playing now and how much bigger they're getting on, yes, social media, but also how much it's playing a role in my clients every day. So histamines are basically natural chemicals that the body produces. So it plays crucial roles across various symptoms. And so what it does is it plays a role in immune system function. So basically, histamines act as first responders in immune defense, and they help identify and respond to allergens or pathogens, and basically serves to protect us from the potential harm of those pathogens. So basically, when the body detects a foreign substance, so think pollen, dust, leaves, I find a lot of my clients, when they're doing outside work, a lot of them experience more histamine symptoms. Those foreign substances release histamines to help fight off those invaders. And then what happens is they cause inflammation to alert the body that something needs attention. So then that's when you experience these allergy symptoms. So redness, swelling, itching, things like that. So I would think of histamines as your body's way of raising an alarm, but it can feel intense when there's too much of it. And I think there's different levels of it. I was listening to a podcast the other day of a very intense histamine reaction where it comes upon you randomly and you get super red and itchy, but a lot of the times it can be a little bit milder. So, Haley, I don't know if you can speak to that too, but from all of my knowledge and research that I've been doing, there are definitely more severe reactions, especially if your body is fighting off a more critical pathogen from my experience and knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. So histamines, they are part of our immune system. They help us, like Jess mentioned. Histamines are that chemical that will help fight off invaders like dust or pollen or mold is another prime example, or even a parasite. And they do help our immune function get back to homeostasis. But when we have an overload of histamines, and we're going to talk about some of the common reasons why, which brings us into you can actually not have allergies anymore. Like I relied on Zyrtec or Claritin, whatever the heck it was, for over 10 years because I just had allergies what seemed like all year long. And I can say now I honestly haven't taken anything like that for I would get like sinus pressure, headaches, dry, scratchy eyes, scratchy throat, brain fog. Felt like I was living in that stuffy fog and I'd have to take the allergy med. And then there's a whole slew of issues that can come from chronic use of those, like constipation, but we won't get into those today. It wasn't until for me I healed my gut, which we'll get into, with that I no longer take a antihistamine and I no longer really take any natural supplements for it either, which we'll talk about. But histamines play a role in our immune system. And yes, that allergy response. The first thing I think of when I think of allergies is histamines, but we have histamine receptors all over our body. Like in the stomach, histamines stimulate gastric acid release. So they stimulate the parietal cells in the stomach to release HCl, which is essential for breaking down food and absorbing nutrients, especially protein, as well as just keeping gut health balanced. So in somebody that has histamine overload, one main reason of that from a gut standpoint could be an overgrowth of bad bacteria. Certain bacteria strains like Morganella is one that comes to mind, do do cause the body to liberate more histamines and exacerbate histamine symptoms in the gut, which histamine symptoms in the gut, what that might look like is bloating, stomach cramping, nausea due to the disrupted gastric acid levels. So sometimes with excess histamine production, we may have high stomach acid and have acid reflux, but it's also possible that we really just have low stomach acid and just excess histamine production. And that is what's causing the reflux to happen. So without proper amounts of histamines, our immune system can't function. But again, when we have too much, that's when we have issues. So that's digestion. Histamines are also involved in nervous system regulation. They are involved in neurotransmitter activity, which affect everything, our alertness, our energy, our focus, and they play a very large role in the sleep wake cycle. So insomnia can be considered a histamine symptom, and that is a symptom that I struggled with for so many years, and I see a lot of clients struggle with, especially when they have parasites, because a parasite drives histamine and mast cell reactions from the immune system. So parasites are one of the biggest causes of histamine symptoms in what we see in our clients. But when we have that overstimulation of the nervous system due to excess histamine production, it can lead to sleep issues, anxiety, and just that overstimulation
Mhm.
feeling in general. I know we both dealt with that. In order to combat that, that's where some people will take those antihistamines. And that's why antihistamines make us sleepy, because it's often excess histamines that are keeping us too alert. We also have histamine receptors that help dilate our blood vessels, allowing for blood to flow to an effective area. So this is one of the positive roles of histamines. Say you get hurt, you fall, you cut yourself, you break something. Histamines are in part of that immune response that will help bring more white blood cells to the affected area to fight infection. So again, it's not black or white. Histamines are good, histamines are bad. We want, just like anything else, the right balance of histamines. And the last, before we get into full-blown symptoms, the last thing to consider, as far as you're wondering, do I have histamine symptoms? Do I not? And I'll let Jess talk about the histamine symptoms next, but histamines and hormones are also very closely connected. Histamine release can be stimulated by estrogen, which obviously, like Jess mentioned earlier, can be cyclical because estrogen fluctuates throughout our cycle. During times of high estrogen, like during ovulation, just before menstruation, histamine levels will rise. And we'll also see excess histamines if we are dealing with some estrogen dominance, meaning your estrogen levels are pretty high and progesterone levels are pretty low, because progesterone helps to calm this histamine response in the body. This exacerbation of high histamines can significantly worsen PMS symptoms, including cramps, bloating, mood swings. Those were some of the biggest things that I noticed when my histamines were out of control, and I see with clients as well. And we can talk more about like why that happens in a bit. But other symptoms that we see, like we already talked about, those allergy-like symptoms. Jess, do you want to talk about some of the other things that we see?
Yeah, the coolest part though is that everyone reacts to histamines differently and can have different symptoms. Even you and I have talked about
Yeah.
how differently we have experienced histamines. So I have more digestive issues when I experience histamines, and also bloating, anxiety, those types of symptoms. But Haley more is along the lines of allergy-like symptoms, I believe.
Mhm.
But
I get
yeah,
super
so like Haley said, allergy-like symptoms, so sneezing, runny nose, watery eyes, even when it's not allergy season. So skin reactions, itchy skin, rashes, flushing, or even hives. Headaches and migraines. This is a really big one that I see with my clients too. So high histamine levels can cause changes in the brain, which can trigger migraines. And from what I've seen, these can be extremely intense. Also, digestive issues, so bloating, cramps, and nausea, like Haley talked about already, which nausea could be due to the disrupted gastric acid levels. Mood and energy shifts, anxiety, irritability, feeling wired, and also hormone imbalances. Elevated histamines can impact estrogen levels, like Haley said, they can affect menstrual cycles and worsen PMS symptoms like hot flashes, breast tenderness, bloating, and things like that. Question for you, Haley, is how do you know when it's histamines? Because a lot of these symptoms can be overlapping with a lot of other things that could be going on. What are cues to you that, okay, yeah, these are histamine symptoms and not anything else?
Definitely. And this is where the symptom-based approach that we take comes into play. This is something that Jess and I do with every client that comes in, and this is something that we're teaching you how to use as a tool. So you can just look at this one like MSQ internal health questionnaire and be able to say, okay, this looks like more histamine. This could be a parasite. This could be mold.
Yeah.
This could be that. But that really comes in handy to where our assessment process, the questionnaire that we use, I honestly love it so much. It really does dive into every different part of the body. So we go through symptoms affecting the head. So headaches,
Hmm.
faintness, dizziness, insomnia. We go through symptoms of the eyes. Are your eyes watery? Are they swollen? Do you have bags under them? Nose, mouth, throat. I'm not going to read them all, but skin, hormones, mind, energy, joints. And by looking at that big picture assessment of your body, plus reading your history and what
Yeah.
you've told us have affected you over the years. Like, for example, we'll get into this next, but some causes of high histamines are a mold overgrowth or a bacterial overgrowth or estrogen dominance. So we'll be able to look at your history and see, for example, how were your periods before you were on birth control? Did you have estrogen dominance like symptoms then? Another cause is not properly detoxing. So sluggish liver detox. Are you also constipated? Because if so, that's going to cause histamines to increase. But the big thing is really just looking at all the symptoms together. And then there are also things that we can see from testing if we have testing, because with histamines and more of that mast cell response, we will see alterations oftentimes with white blood cells in blood work. But the big thing is connecting dots and also getting to the root cause. So, did that answer your question?
Yes, it totally did.
So, as far as what causes histamine overload, I think if you were to Google histamine overload, the first thing that's going to come up is a low histamine diet. And yes, that can be very helpful when you're experiencing these high histamine overload symptoms. However, the diet, a high histamine diet is not going to cause your histamine issues. You're reacting to high histamine foods. And when I think high histamine foods, we're thinking like aged cheeses, alcohol, cured meats, fermented foods, coffee, alcohol. I already said alcohol, things of that nature. Some people are also reactive to things like tomatoes, spicy food, citrus. Think about GERD triggers more or less as well. So certain foods that contain naturally high amounts of histamines can be triggers for this histamine release. However, unless your entire diet is tomatoes, chocolate, alcohol, and cheese, it's very unlikely that is the cause of your histamine overload. But eating a diet high in these foods without supporting the breakdown pathways can lead to buildup. So typically, when we're suspecting issues, we will pull some histamines, maybe not all of them if it's not realistic, from the diet. But some of the main causes that we see in practice every single day are going to be gut health imbalances. So your gut bacteria plays a huge role in histamine management. An imbalance in your gut microbiome, your gut flora can reduce histamine breakdown, especially if you have low levels of the DAO enzyme. So DAO stands for diamine oxidase, which is an enzyme that helps break down and clear histamines from the body. I mentioned this earlier, but there are certain types of bacteria overgrowth that can promote the release in histamines. And there are some that help reduce histamines and reduce inflammation. So if we're having dysbiosis of those bacteria, we are going to have a very hard time clearing histamines from our body. Another thing tied into gut health is our liver health. So if your liver is not helping you detox histamines, that's also where we might run into estrogen dominance issues, because sluggish liver detox also leads to hormonal imbalances. So our liver is what is responsible for helping our body excrete excess estrogen. When we have a liver issue, and we might see things like constipation or hard stool, or maybe like your skin feels like it's just getting dull or more fine lines, hair and nail issues, things like that, poor energy, things of that nature, low vitamin D levels, high cholesterol. These can be some signs of sluggish liver on labs, poor thyroid function. Then we're not clearing the histamines effectively either. And just like estrogen, they're both getting reabsorbed. There
Hmm.
are also a lot of vitamins and minerals that are involved in the clearance of histamines and the production of the DAO enzyme. So certain nutrients like B vitamins, vitamin C, magnesium, and copper can support clearance of histamines. So we might see a buildup of histamines if we're deficient in these things. However, again, typically when we have a nutrient deficiency, there is a root cause. You're not just randomly deficient in B vitamins, unless, of course, you're not eating a very colorful or quality animal protein based diet, then it's unlikely that we're going to see that many deficiencies without a root cause like a gut imbalance or low stomach acid to where you're not absorbing vitamins and minerals. I actually talked to a client about that today where I was like, girl, we've literally improved so much, but your labs suck. Like you're still not getting sufficient amounts of B vitamins, vitamin D, her zinc, her alkaline phosphatase was super low. So zinc deficiency, despite supplementing with some of these things and getting her to a place where she's been able to lose
Mm-hmm.
body fat, she's feeling so much better. So I was like, it's your stomach acid. We need to really work on the stomach acid piece so you can absorb your vitamins and minerals. But moral of the story, certain nutrients like these will support the clearance of histamine. So if you're low on them, you may struggle to process histamines, leading to accumulation. But again, it comes back to the gut and liver with those variables. And then, like just mentioned earlier, hormone fluctuation. So estrogen
Mm-hmm.
promotes that histamine release. So that's why some women, and I noticed this for a very long time as well, will notice increased symptoms during a certain period of their menstrual cycle, particularly around ovulation. I have a couple clients that they have skin presentations of histamine. So rashes, eczema, psoriasis kind of ordeals. And from the weekly coaching that we do, we are tracking their cycles every single month to see how long was your cycle? How many days did you bleed? How heavy was it? And how were your symptoms around it? Because a lot of our clients, like just, I know you have a couple of these girls that we're working on, they'll get migraines around their cycle or around
Yeah.
ovulation when estrogen is high. I have a couple girlies that used to, it doesn't happen anymore because we fixed the issue. They would get skin rashes only right before their period. And that is a sign of histamine. So that's where not only as coaches is it helpful for us to know, okay, this is a histamine based issue. Where is the issue coming from? Because again, we have
Mm-hmm.
different types of histamine receptors all over our body, right? We have our H1 receptor, which is more in the skin. So that's where we'll see hives, even allergy issues. That one also more so regulates our sleep wake cycle. We have H2 receptors, which are in the EC cells of the gut. And those are the ones, like we talked about, will help release stomach acid. So that's where we want to look out for that low DAO enzyme. And that's where, if you're having a lot of histamine GI symptoms, we are definitely going to pull out histamines from the diet for a period of time, support with the right types of probiotics, immune support, and everything of that nature. H3 receptors are what are responsible for neurotransmitters. Jess and I have both had these histamine symptoms. And I would say when I was dealing in the peak of my gut issues, these symptoms were the absolute fucking worst, was with the H3 receptor that regulates neurotransmitters. Like I literally am reading like old notes that I have on histamines. And in the notes I wrote, this is me now, because these notes are from years ago. So this is where we might even see sleep disorders, insomnia. My ADHD and
Mm-hmm.
anxiety were off the fucking charts. And that's why SSRIs and different anti-anxiety medications work, because they block that H3 receptor. So this is where if we're having a lot of neurological symptoms, a lot of fatigue, poor memory, trouble focusing, heightened anxiety, that doesn't necessarily mean you have a diagnosis of anything, and we can't diagnose you with that anyway. But histamines play a large role in neurotransmitters because they stimulate GABA, which is an antihistamine, which is an anti-anxiety neurotransmitter. So if we are having excess GABA, but it can't be turned into glutamate, which is what we need. No, I'm sorry, that's backwards. We want glutamate to turn into GABA. When we have an issue with histamine, we're not converting that glutamine into GABA, and we'll have decreased, we're going to have issues with serotonin and dopamine. So that's where, Jess, you and I were talking about this before we hopped on, because Jess has been having like a little bit more concentration issues, a little bit more anxiety. So I recommended magnesium threonate, which is basically L-theanine as magnesium threonate, which will help because it crosses the blood-brain barrier. It's the only type of magnesium that can cross the blood-brain barrier and can work to increase serotonin and dopamine and GABA, like we talked about earlier, and it can stabilize those mast cells in the brain, which are in part responsible for the histamine production, hoping we'll see a reduction in Jess's anxiety and ADHD like symptoms. I've noticed a big difference taking that as well. You can also take GABA. I take GABA at night. GABA cannot cross the blood-brain barrier, so it's not going to be as effective. But again, that's a little side tangent about the neurotransmitter piece.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I feel like too, understanding the root cause is the big piece. Like for me, yes, okay, I have a lot of some of these symptoms, like some anxiety and increased stress during my luteal phase, but I've identified that it's more due to my adrenals and my cortisol
Yep.
versus high histamines.
Exactly. And then the last one is the H4 receptors, and those are going to, if we have issues there, be more respiratory driven. And I have a friend and a client where this is how I knew that they had histamine issues, because they had asthma, reoccurring chest infections. One of my
Hmm.
clients had pneumonia 3 fucking times within a 4 month span. And I've worked with this woman forever, for years. And she never got sick, knock on wood. She never got sick. And she got pneumonia so many times, always had horrible seasonal allergies when it was seasonal. That she managed it for a while with Zyrtec and stuff like that, but we ended up testing her for mold, and it was like very high amounts because we saw these histamine symptoms. Her GI, she didn't have any GI symptoms. So that's where, again, histamine symptoms can present in, you could have 6 different people and they could all have a different presentation of it. It's often mold related because mold induces that type of immune reaction. But histamines also play a role in regulating our blood sugar and everything of that nature. They're very systemic when they're off. So that's why they're so important to talk about when it comes to management of histamines. I already mentioned a little bit about the low histamine diet. Another thing to consider is going to be stress management. You'll probably hear us say this in every single podcast, but chronic asthma, you probably know this already, raises cortisol, which can indirectly impact our histamine levels, because when we have excess stress, not only can it cause more histamines to be released, but it also lowers our body's ability to clear them.
Yeah.
I was talking to a client about this morning who noticed that all of a sudden her GI issues went from 0 to 100 and were back in full force. And then I looked at her stress report, stress rating, and what she said about stress for the week, and she rated her stress an 8 out of 10. And I was like, okay,
Mm.
seems, and she does have very histamine dominant GI symptoms like reflux and belly aches and things of that nature, which we're still working on. But we notice a big flare up with that with stress. And the reason is, when we're stressed, even if it's something silly like a work issue or maybe a fight with a friend or a spouse, our body doesn't know that it's something small, right? Like, I know for me, we're looking for apartments and it's stressful as fuck. And there are definitely days I feel like I'm operating in this like fight or flight, like not able to focus, but feeling like I have a million things going on in my brain, like just on edge state. That is stress. And when we're stressed like that, our bodies will take all of our blood flow and shunt it typically away from the GI tract, away from the liver, and towards our limbs and our muscles and our fat cells to get ready to either give us fuel, run from danger, or what have you. And I'm curious if anybody else has trouble sitting still when they notice more stress. I know I do. You have that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'll move around the house like literally all day.
But I'm just naturally like that. So no, I'm
Oh,
just
I'm not. I'm like a sloth at heart. It's anyway, it's a whole thing. But so it's just interesting how much histamines can affect us. So stress management is going to be another really big one.
Mhm.
But as far as, I would say, more like natural, holistic ways to manage histamine levels, we're going to get to the root cause. We need to get to the
Yeah.
root cause, because again, if there's an imbalance in the gut, like, we can support it with probiotics, which we'll get into. But there are times where we need to go through what we consider our renew a protocol approach, where we're removing whatever bacterial overgrowth, whatever infection that there is, and replenishing our gut bugs, which we'll get into a little bit more. But Jess, do you want to talk more about like different ways that we help our clients and manage these symptoms?
Yeah, yeah. We can start with what we can do with diet first. So I think the biggest thing is that adding anti-inflammatory foods. So like Haley said, B vitamins, vitamin C. So think fresh fruits, vegetables, omega-3 rich foods, and ginger to really reduce that inflammation in the body. Some lower histamine food options are fresh meat, fish, leafy greens, apples, and carrots. So again, all these foods are high in vitamin D, magnesium, all your B vitamins, right? And things like this. The other thing that we can do for a short amount of time, lower those histamine foods, but also identify what high histamine foods are triggering those histamines or that inflammation in your body. We can try a temporary elimination of, like Haley talked about, aged cheeses, fermented foods, alcohol, especially wine, aged wine, and things like that. Would you add anything in terms of diet, what people can do here?
No, and if you did look up the low histamine diet, you'll see no
Hmm.
leftovers. So it does make it seem as if you have to cook everything fresh. That is one thing that we are very lenient on because it's just not realistic. Like I've done low histamine multiple times and it is pretty helpful, but that is something I personally never had to do. Now we do have clients that know themselves and they know that they're that sensitive to it, but typically that is not something that we have clients do. And we, because saying don't eat leftovers is very challenging, especially if you do meal prep. So when you're thinking about trying an elimination diet, you don't have to go 0 to 100. Typically we like to do it over the course of 2 weeks, where it's like, all right, week one, look at what you eat all the time and let's pull a few things out, see if we notice a difference. A lot of times my clients will start with like tomatoes and strawberries and like things that are pretty easy to swap out for another fruit or veggie. And then we'll slowly look at some other things with the goal of eventually taking histamines out for about 14 days to see if it's making a difference or not. But again, you're going to want to meet yourself where you're at there. And another one, big one, is coffee. Coffee is
Coffee,
histamines.
yes.
That was so sad when I had to
Sucks.
take it out. It sucks, but it is what it is. So that's where oftentimes with my clients, that's the last thing we pull out, but I would still limit it to 1 cup per day, like 1 8 ounce, nothing more. And if you do notice exacerbation of symptoms, so maybe sneezing, itching, diarrhea after caffeine, that is probably related to the histamine content.
But like you said, getting to the main root cause. While you eliminate these foods, the whole goal is getting to the root cause of what's causing this. Why aren't you breaking down
Yeah,
histamines properly, right?
you can eat them again, right? Because on
Yes.
a low histamine diet for the rest of your life is not at all realistic. And
No.
yeah, sometimes keeping them out for 2 to 4 weeks alone and then putting them back in is enough. I would say for 99% of people, it's not. Like you need to do something
Yeah.
about it and figure like whether it's
100%.
opening up liver, supporting the gut, you need to do something.
Yeah. The other thing is supporting gut health. So there are certain probiotics that can help support the balance of gut bacteria, but as I have learned, like you have to be cautious because some strains and probiotics are histamine producing. So strains like Bifidobacterium and there's two different ones. Infantis and Bifidobacterium longum are generally safe, but there are certain probiotics that are labeled as histamine safe. And so we've used when we see that someone is histamine dominant, this is one of the focuses that we make sure we are using a probiotic that is not histamine producing and even contains some ingredients that can support you, whether that's bromelain or I don't know if I'm. And then also going back to our renew method. Sorry, my battery's running low. I keep getting no. I know I will. But based on our renew method, doing a kill off of certain bacteria, if we find that you do have a bacteria overgrowth, we do run GI maps with clients. And so if we do see that there is a pathogen present, then doing a kill off may be something that we need to do. And lately it has been a lot of generally gentle kill offs. We have found to be really successful with our clients. And then also fiber from soluble and insoluble foods. You can do it through diet. It doesn't necessarily need to be through supplement form. So, veggies, fruits, whole grains, those are all really help feed good bacteria. And so feeding the good bacteria with prebiotics, probiotics, and that will really support histamine clearance.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of the histamine changes for what we do with the gut will depend on symptoms because like we talked about earlier, histamines are an immune response. So we need to understand where in the immune system this is happening, what systems are being impacted. But typically, when we see histamine symptoms, if we're talking about our innate versus acquired immune system, this is often where we see that acquired response from our Th2 cells, T helper 2, and maybe Th9, T helper 9 cells as well, where we're seeing more of that. You might have heard of mast cell activation syndrome. That is another big, people will call mast cell activation syndrome the root cause, but there's a root cause of mast cell activation, right? And a lot of it does come down to understanding what your immune system is doing. So while yes, we'll support clearance of the histamines by using our renew method, which Jess briefly mentioned, this is the way that we'll take clients through getting to the root cause. Step one is going to be root cause. So getting to the root cause, identifying what that is, whether that's using labs that you already have, our symptom-based questionnaires, and or advanced testing. And then E is getting down the essentials for gut health. So that's a little bit of what we've already talked about as far as, are we eating a nutrient dense diet? Are we doing the things that we need to be doing for stress management? Are we hydrating? Are we sleeping? And then we'll nurture your gut with the 5 R's. So that's where we'll remove the pathogen that we found through testing, and really that approach is really customized to what your lifestyle is looking, because that can be a big stress. We'll replace what's missing. So like we mentioned earlier, a lot of times we'll see low stomach acid and digestive enzymes. So we're going to want to replace those and make sure we're always repopulating the gut with good bacteria, probiotics, prebiotics, and repairing anything that could be damaged. A lot of times we'll see leaky gut with histamine issues. And the reason why symptoms may be systemic is if they're stemming in the gut and we have that leaky gut, that intestinal permeability, meaning things can float through the lining of the gut into the bloodstream. That's where we get a bigger immune response, and we need to really work on the GI lining. And we do have that gut quiz out that you can take to figure out maybe where your gut imbalances are coming from. But once we go through that approach, we really want to establish maintenance and stick to a routine that feels sustainable for you. And hopefully at that point, we've gotten rid of the histamine issue. We've made it so you can clear histamines better, so we can diversify your diet. Like I have clients where we've done that 5R step with, and they can now drink wine, have aged cheese without getting rashes, stuffy noses, stomach aches, bloating, all of that, and really just finding how it fits into your life once you've finished recovering, right? Because everybody makes a gut protocol seem so intimidating, and I'm not going to say it's not, because it's a lot, but that's where really customizing it to your lifestyle can be helpful, and focusing on filling gaps along the way. So again, the stomach acid, the leaky gut, the nutrients. So there are certain things that we can do from food, but also from supplementation with vitamins and minerals. Vitamin C, like we've mentioned many times, is a natural antihistamine. Vitamin C can be found in foods like citrus, strawberries, and bell pepper. But if you're struggling with histamines, those might not be your best friend at the time. One supplement that we love for histamines, and I've given this to a few of you on Instagram, it's called D-Hist, or they have one pure encapsulations. It's like a Hist Reset or something like that. But it
Mhm.
contains different compounds that are going to help with that immune response, like quercetin, like N-acetylcysteine, a little bit of liver support, stinging nettle, that brohelmine, like Jess mentioned, and then the vitamin C. Ideally, you don't have to take that forever, but that is something that we find really helpful for clients while we're focusing on some of the basics like sleep and stress management too.
I love that.
Do you have anything to add or any questions about any of that?
I maybe one question to ask you. I have a client. She has done all the things, adding DHIS, managing gut health, and we've gotten to a point where she is really managing stress, and we're trying to prioritize. She's a mom, young child, so stress and sleep are still working on it, but gut health is in a really good state. Mental health is in a good state. And she came to me and she said, Jess, like, we're doing everything. Like, what else do we need to do here? Because I eventually want to come off of DHIS and come off of some of these supplements. And so wanted you to answer this for everyone listening.
Yep. So with this client in particular, because Jess and I talked about this before we hopped on, so I know
Yeah.
exactly what she's talking about. What our suspicion is, what's driving her histamine overload is likely a little bit of estrogen dominance. She
Yes.
does have a lot of those symptoms with very erratic, I think, mood and
Yeah.
emotional regulation around her cycle, noticing a lower tolerance to stress around her cycle, maybe some more poor recovery in the luteal phase, as well as just like coming back from having a baby and regulating her sex hormones. So her estrogen is on the
Yes.
higher side based on her labs, and progesterone
Yeah.
is lower. So we're supporting that already. That will help, right? We have things in dim,
Takes
getting her
time.
to, yeah, it takes time for one, get her to eat more cruciferous veggies and things of that nature now that her gut can handle them. But for
Yeah.
her, and I told Jess this before we started recording, I think it's time that we do add something like a DAO enzyme.
Yeah.
It isn't something, again, that you want to be taking forever, but when we've already done all the things and it does seem like your body still needs a little bit of help breaking down those histamines, while we support her stomach acid naturally, while we support liver and hormone detox naturally through food and teas and apple cider vinegar, it wouldn't help her to have a little bit of this extra DAO in there. And then also for her, we're going to really make sure that and she already has vitamin B6 in there, because B6 is going to be really important for hormone regulation, but it also can support DAO enzyme and histamine breakdown. But we're also going to talk about adding copper for her, because copper will also help support DAO. And especially when we have clients supplement with zinc, we're going to eventually want to add some copper in there to balance those two out. You can also get little bits of B6 and copper through things like chickpeas and chicken and sunflower seeds. I think I have one client that likes to do a sunflower seed butter, and then other vitamins and minerals that we'll recommend. And I know she's already taking magnesium, but magnesium is going to be a huge one, and it supports that enzyme
Yeah.
production and reduces inflammation in the body. And then just knowing this client, we're going to keep working on stress management, because that is always a thing when you're
Stress management.
busy individual, busy mom. But for her,
Yeah.
now that we've really gotten gut is in a good spot, thyroid was something we worked on a lot with her too. And
Yep.
the detox, I think just finishing the job with that DAO, continuing to choose the foods
Mm.
that support that histamine breakdown rather than overload for now, and
Yeah.
really honing in on the stress management. And she should be able to come off of the dehist. I know that was really helpful when I was struggling with histamine overload. But again, histamines aren't something to be demonized. They're not at all. They play a very valuable role in our body and in our immune system. Symptoms arise when they're out of balance, just like anything else. Don't let somebody convince you that taking Zyrtec for the rest of your life, or even taking Dehist for the rest of your life, is the way to manage it. There are a lot of different strategies that we can use to get to the root cause. That is always number one, R of renew. Get to the root cause of this histamine overload. And if you do want to get a taste of what our symptom-based approach is, go ahead and take our free gut quiz. It literally takes like maybe 2 minutes. If that, it's 30 questions to get a deeper dive into what might be causing these issues. But thank you so much for hanging out with us today. If you like this episode, make sure you subscribe, and I look forward to chatting with you all on Instagram.